The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle, as Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another ordinary day. At 52 years old, Thomas had served the royal family for over 2 decades, standing guard through countless state functions, private moments, and public ceremonies. His weathered hands, marked by years of military service before joining the Royal Guard, trembled slightly as he fastened the golden buttons of his tunic. Thomas had witnessed the growth of Prince George from a curious toddler who would peek around corners to catch glimpses of the guards, to the thoughtful young man he had become. The prince, now 15, possessed an unusual quality that set him apart from other members of the royal family. While his parents focused on their duties and public appearances, George seemed to notice the people who worked quietly in the background, the ones who made the royal machine function smoothly. On this particular Tuesday morning, Thomas noticed something different in the castle's atmosphere. Staff members whispered in hushed tones as they passed through the corridors, and there was an unusual tension in the air. The head of security had called an emergency meeting for all guards, which was rare unless there was a serious security threat or major event planned. As Thomas made his way to the briefing room, he reflected on his journey to this position. He had joined the army at 18, served 3 tours in Afghanistan, and lost his best friend to an explosion that had left Thomas with a slight limp and nightmares that still visited him on quiet nights. The Royal Guard position had been his chance at a peaceful life, a way to serve his country without the constant fear of death that had haunted his military years. The other guards gathered in the briefing room, their faces showing the same confusion Thomas felt. Captain Williams, a stern man with 30 years of service, stood at the front of the room with an expression that Thomas had learned to read over the years. Something significant was about to happen, something that would change their routine in ways they couldn't yet imagine. "Gentlemen," Captain Williams began, his voice carrying the weight of authority and concern, "we have received an unusual request directly from Prince George himself. This is not something that has happened before in my experience, and it requires our immediate attention and careful consideration." Thomas felt his heart rate increase. In all his years of service, he had never heard of a royal family member, especially one so young, making direct requests to the security detail. The protocols were clear and well established. All security matters went through proper channels, from the private secretaries to the head of household, then to the security chief, and finally to the guards themselves. The captain continued, "Prince George has specifically requested a private meeting with Guard Thomas Mitchell. He has insisted that this meeting take place today, and he has made it clear that this is a matter of personal importance to him. The Queen and Prince William have been informed and have given their consent, though they are as puzzled as we are about the nature of this request." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. 22 years of faithful service, and he had never been singled out by any member of the royal family for a private conversation. His mind raced through possibilities. Had he done something wrong? Had someone complained about his conduct? Was there a security breach he was unaware of? His fellow guards turned to look at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. James Patterson, who had served alongside Thomas for 15 years, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Whatever it is, Tom, you'll handle it with the dignity you've shown all these years," James whispered. Captain Williams outlined the details of the meeting. It would take place in the Queen's private sitting room at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Thomas would be relieved of his regular duties for the day and should report directly to the captain's office at 2:30 for final instructions. The unusual nature of the request meant that standard protocols would be modified, but Thomas was to maintain his professional demeanor and remember that he was representing not just himself, but the entire Royal Guard. As the briefing ended and the other guards dispersed to their duties, Thomas remained seated, trying to process what had just happened. He thought about his daughter Sarah, who was studying medicine at university and who had always been proud of her father's service to the crown. He thought about his late wife Margaret, who had encouraged him to take the Royal Guard position after his military service ended, believing it would give him the stability and peace he needed. The hours until the meeting crawled by with agonizing slowness. Thomas found himself unable to concentrate on his usual duties, constantly checking his watch and wondering what Prince George could possibly want to discuss with him. He had observed the young prince from a distance for years, noting his kindness toward staff members and his genuine interest in the people around him, but they had never exchanged more than polite greetings. As 2:30 approached, Thomas made his way to Captain Williams' office, his mind filled with questions and his heart heavy with uncertainty about what the afternoon would bring. Captain Williams greeted Thomas with an expression that mixed professional concern with genuine sympathy. The captain had served long enough to understand that unexpected summons from royal family members could change a person's life in ways both wonderful and terrible. He had seen guards receive commendations that launched their careers, and he had also witnessed those whose small mistakes had ended their service abruptly. "Thomas, I want you to know that your record is exemplary," the captain began, settling behind his mahogany desk that had witnessed countless similar conversations over the decades. "Whatever Prince George wishes to discuss, approach it with the confidence that comes from knowing you have served with honor and distinction. Remember, you are not just Thomas Mitchell in that room. You represent every guard who has stood watch over this family." The captain's words provided some comfort, but Thomas still felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on his shoulders. He had dressed in his finest uniform, polished every button and badge until they gleamed, and rehearsed various scenarios in his mind. Yet nothing could truly prepare him for a conversation with a member of the royal family, especially one initiated by the young prince himself. As 3 o'clock approached, Thomas walked through the familiar corridors of Windsor Castle, passing portraits of monarchs who had ruled for centuries. The walls seemed to whisper stories of duty, sacrifice, and service that stretched back through generations. He had walked these halls thousands of times, but today each step felt different, weighted with significance he couldn't yet understand. The Queen's private sitting room was a sanctuary within the castle, a place where the formality of royal life softened into something more personal and intimate. Thomas had guarded the entrance to this room countless times but had never set foot inside. The space was smaller than he had imagined, decorated with family photographs, comfortable furniture, and personal mementos that revealed the human side of the royal family. Prince George stood by the window, looking out at the gardens where tourists gathered hoping for a glimpse of royal life. At 15, he possessed a presence that seemed older than his years, a quiet confidence that spoke of the weight of responsibility he would one day carry. When he turned to greet Thomas, his expression was serious but kind, reflecting the genuine concern that had become his trademark among the castle staff. "Guard Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Prince George said, his voice carrying the refined accent of his upbringing but tempered with warmth that put Thomas slightly at ease. "Please sit down. I know this is unusual, and I appreciate your willingness to speak with me privately." Thomas remained standing until the prince gestured again toward a comfortable chair near the fireplace. Even in this informal setting, protocol demanded that he wait for permission before sitting in the presence of royalty. The prince took a seat across from him, leaning forward slightly in a manner that suggested this conversation was important to him. "I have been watching you, Guard Mitchell, not in any official capacity, but because I have noticed something about the way you carry yourself, the way you interact with others when you think no one is looking," Prince George continued. "You have a kindness in your eyes that speaks of someone who has seen difficult things but has chosen to remain compassionate despite those experiences." Thomas felt a surge of surprise. He had always believed his role was to be invisible, to blend into the background while remaining alert to any potential threats. The idea that Prince George had been observing him closely enough to form such detailed impressions was both flattering and unsettling. The prince continued, "I have also noticed that you sometimes favor your left leg, particularly during long ceremonial duties. I have done some research and learned about your military service, your tours in Afghanistan, and the circumstances that led to your injury. Your sacrifice for this country did not end when you left the military. It continues every day as you stand guard over my family." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. In all his years of service, no one in the royal family had ever acknowledged his military background or the daily physical challenges he faced as a result of his war injury. He had worked hard to hide his discomfort, to maintain the stoic appearance expected of a royal guard, never imagining that his efforts had been noticed and appreciated. "Your Highness, I am honored by your words," Thomas managed to say, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "My service to your family has been a privilege, and any discomfort I may experience is a small price to pay for the honor of protecting those I serve." Prince George shook his head gently. That is exactly what I expected you to say, and it is precisely why I wanted to speak with you. You have given so much of yourself, first to your country in war and now to my family in peace, yet you ask for nothing in return. You stand for hours in uncomfortable positions. You work through pain that others cannot see, and you do it all with a dignity that inspires those around you. The prince stood and moved to a small desk in the corner of the room, retrieving a folder that contained several documents. Thomas watched with growing curiosity as Prince George returned to his seat, the folder held carefully in his hands as if it contained something precious. I have been thinking about what it means to serve, what it means to sacrifice for others, and what it means to recognize those sacrifices appropriately, Prince George said, his young voice carrying a wisdom that surprised Thomas. I have also been thinking about the future, about the kind of king I want to become, and the kind of people I want to surround myself with as I grow into my responsibilities. Thomas felt his heart racing as he began to sense that this conversation was leading somewhere significant, somewhere that would change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The serious expression on Prince George's face suggested that whatever was coming next would be a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. Prince George opened the folder with careful deliberation, revealing documents that Thomas couldn't quite see from his position across the room. The young prince's hands moved with purpose, selecting specific papers while his expression remained thoughtfully serious. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window caught the gold embossing on what appeared to be official letterhead, creating small rainbows that danced across the coffee table between them. Guard Mitchell, I want to share something with you that I have never told anyone else, Prince George began, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. When I was younger, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, I used to sneak out of my room at night. Not to cause trouble, but because I was curious about the people who protected us while we slept. I would hide in the shadows and watch the guards on duty. Thomas felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he remembered those years when the young prince had been particularly active and curious. There had been several occasions when guards had reported glimpsing a small figure in pajamas, darting between doorways, though they had never officially reported these sightings, understanding that childhood curiosity was natural and harmless. One night when I was about 10, I witnessed something that has stayed with me ever since, the prince continued, his eyes focusing on a memory that clearly held special significance. It was during one of those terrible winter storms we had a few years ago. The heating system in the East Wing had failed, and the night guards were working in freezing conditions. I watched from my hiding spot as you took off your own coat and gave it to a younger guard who was visibly shivering. Thomas felt his breath catch as the memory came flooding back. It had been Guard Timothy Wells, barely 21 and new to the service, working his first winter at the castle. The young man had been too proud to admit he was struggling with the cold, but Thomas had recognized the signs of someone who was suffering in silence. The act of giving away his coat had seemed natural, automatic, the kind of thing any decent person would do for a colleague in distress. You stood in that freezing corridor for the remainder of your shift without that coat, Prince George continued, his voice filled with admiration. When Timothy tried to return it to you, you told him that looking out for each other was what made the guard strong. You said that one person's comfort mattered less than the team's ability to function effectively. The prince paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the room. Thomas felt uncomfortable with the praise, remembering the incident as simply doing what was right rather than anything deserving of special recognition. Yet hearing it described from Prince George's perspective made him realize that even small acts of kindness could have profound impacts on those who witnessed them. That night changed how I thought about leadership, about what it means to put others before yourself, Prince George said, leaning forward in his chair. I realized that true strength doesn't come from commanding others, but from caring for them. You taught me that lesson without ever knowing you were teaching it. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the revelation that his simple act of kindness had been observed and had influenced the future king's understanding of leadership. He had given away his coat without a second thought, driven by the same instincts that had made him a good soldier and had guided his approach to every aspect of his service. Prince George lifted one of the documents from the folder, revealing what appeared to be an official royal commission. The ornate language and formal seals indicated that this was a document of significant importance, something that could change the trajectory of a person's entire life. Guard Mitchell, I have spoken with my grandmother, my father, and my mother about you. I have shared not only what I witnessed that night, but also my observations of your character over the years, your dedication, your integrity, your willingness to sacrifice for others, and your quiet leadership among the guard staff, the prince explained. Thomas felt his heart pounding as he began to understand that this conversation was leading toward something far more significant than he had imagined. The formal nature of the documents, the care with which Prince George was speaking, and the emotional weight of the moment all suggested that his life was about to change dramatically. I have requested that you be considered for a position that has never existed before, a role that I believe is necessary as our family evolves and as I prepare for my future responsibilities, Prince George said, his voice carrying both nervousness and determination. I want you to become my personal mentor and security advisor, a position that would involve not just protecting me physically, but helping to guide my understanding of what it means to serve others. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow, a position that had never existed before, created specifically for him by a 15-year-old prince who had been watching and learning from his example. The magnitude of the offer was almost impossible to comprehend. Such a role would mean leaving his position as a regular guard, stepping into uncharted territory, and taking on responsibilities that would shape the future king's development. Your Highness, Thomas began, his voice barely above a whisper, I am deeply honored by your confidence in me, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for such an important responsibility. I am a simple soldier who has tried to do his duty with honor. Prince George smiled for the first time since the conversation began. That humility, Guard Mitchell, is exactly why you are the right person for this role. You don't seek power or recognition. You simply do what is right because it is right. That is the kind of guidance I need as I learn to navigate the complexities of my future. The prince extended the document toward Thomas, the formal commission that would change everything about his service to the royal family. As Thomas reached for the paper, his hands trembling slightly, he realized that this moment would be remembered as the day when a simple act of kindness, witnessed by a curious child, had grown into an opportunity that would define the rest of his life. Thomas held the document in his hands, feeling the weight of its heavy paper and the significance of the royal seals that decorated its borders. The commission was beautifully crafted, written in the formal language that had been used for centuries to appoint individuals to positions of trust within the royal household. As he read the carefully worded appointment, he began to understand the full scope of what Prince George was offering him. The position would involve accompanying Prince George to official functions, providing security expertise during his education about royal duties, and serving as a trusted advisor who could offer perspective from someone who had experienced both military service and years within the royal household. It was a role that blended protection with mentorship, combining Thomas's practical experience with his natural ability to guide and support others. I must be honest with you, Your Highness, Thomas said, looking up from the document to meet Prince George's earnest gaze. This opportunity is beyond anything I ever imagined possible, but I am concerned about my qualifications for the advisory aspects of this role. I am comfortable with security matters, but providing guidance to someone of your position and intelligence seems beyond my capabilities. Prince George shook his head firmly. You underestimate yourself, Guard Mitchell. The guidance I need is not about protocol or politics or the formal aspects of royal life. I have tutors and advisors for those things. What I need is someone who can help me understand what it means to be a good person in a position of extraordinary privilege and responsibility. The prince stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the grounds where his ancestors had walked for generations. I watch my father and my grandmother, and I see how they balance their personal values with their public duties. But they were born into this life, raised from birth to understand its demands. I want to learn from someone who chose to serve, someone who understands what sacrifice means because they have made real sacrifices for others. Thomas felt the truth of those words settling into his understanding. Prince George was seeking something that couldn't be taught in formal lessons or learned from books. He wanted to understand the heart of service, the motivation that drives someone to put others before themselves consistently and without recognition. Your military service taught you about leadership under pressure, about making decisions when lives depend on those choices, Prince George continued. Your years as a guard have shown you how to remain alert and protective while still maintaining your humanity and compassion. These are exactly the qualities I need to learn as I prepare for kingship. The prince returned to his seat, his expression growing more serious. But I must tell you that accepting this position would require a significant sacrifice on your part. You would need to step away from your current role, leave behind the camaraderie of the guard unit that has been your family for over 20 years. You would be entering a position with no established precedent, no clear guidelines, and no guarantee of how it will develop over time. Thomas felt the weight of this decision pressing down on him. Leaving his position as a royal guard would mean abandoning the security and familiarity of a role he had mastered, stepping into uncertainty for the sake of an opportunity that might not succeed. Yet as he looked at Prince George's hopeful expression, he realized that this decision was about more than his own comfort or career prospects. "There is something else you should know," Prince George said, reaching for another document from the folder. "I have already spoken with Guard Patterson and several of your other colleagues. They have all expressed their belief that you are the right person for this role. Guard Patterson said that you have been mentoring younger guards informally for years, that you have a natural ability to teach through example rather than instruction." The mention of his fellow guards brought a smile to Thomas's face. James Patterson had indeed been like a brother to him throughout their years of service together. The fact that his colleagues supported this opportunity made the decision feel less like abandonment and more like natural progression. However, Prince George continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "I want you to understand that this is not a decision you need to make today. Take time to consider what this would mean for your life, for your future, for your family. Discuss it with those whose opinions you value. This opportunity will remain open for you regardless of how long you need to decide." Thomas looked down at the commission again, reading the carefully crafted language that would transform him from Guard Mitchell into something entirely new. The role came with increased compensation, enhanced status within the royal household, and opportunities for advancement that would never be available in his current position. More importantly, it offered the chance to make a real difference in the development of a future king. "Your Highness, may I ask why you chose to approach me directly rather than going through the normal channels?" Thomas asked, curious about the unusual nature of this entire conversation. Prince George smiled, showing a glimpse of the mischievous child he had once been. "Because the normal channels would have focused on qualifications and protocols rather than character and heart. I needed to meet with you personally to explain why this matters to me. To help you understand that this is not just about creating a new position, but about preparing me to be the kind of king this country deserves." The prince's words carried a maturity that impressed Thomas deeply. At 15, Prince George was already thinking about the kind of leader he wanted to become, actively seeking guidance that would help him develop the qualities necessary for effective and compassionate kingship. As the afternoon light began to fade, Thomas realized that he was facing the most important decision of his life. The choice he made in the coming days would determine not only his own future, but potentially influence the development of a future monarch. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity to make a meaningful difference in ways he had never imagined possible. That evening, Thomas sat in his small apartment near the castle grounds, staring at the commission document spread out on his kitchen table. The familiar space felt different somehow, as if the conversation with Prince George had changed not just his future prospects, but his entire understanding of his place in the world. The modest furnishings that had provided comfort for years now seemed to represent a life that might be ending, making way for something entirely unknown. He picked up the framed photograph of his late wife Margaret, remembering her wisdom during the difficult transition from military to civilian life. She had always possessed an intuitive understanding of his character, often seeing potential in him that he couldn't recognize in himself. She would know what to do. He whispered to the empty room, feeling the familiar ache of missing her guidance during important decisions. The phone rang, interrupting his contemplation. James Patterson's familiar voice greeted him with warmth and curiosity. "Tom, the whole guard is buzzing about your private meeting with Prince George. None of us has ever heard of such a thing happening before. Are you allowed to tell me what it was about?" Thomas found himself grateful for his friend's direct approach. James had always been someone he could trust with sensitive information, and tonight he desperately needed someone to help him process what had happened. "James, I need to talk to someone about this, but it has to stay between us until I make my decision." Over the next hour, Thomas shared the details of his conversation with Prince George, describing the offered position and the reasoning behind it. James listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly allowing Thomas to work through his thoughts verbally. When Thomas finished, silence stretched between them as James absorbed the magnitude of what his friend was facing. "Tom, in all our years together, I have watched you lead by example more effectively than officers with formal authority," James finally said. "You have taught younger guards how to balance strength with compassion, how to remain alert without becoming paranoid, how to serve with dignity while maintaining their humanity. Prince George is not wrong about your qualifications for this role." Thomas felt both encouraged and overwhelmed by his friend's confidence. "But James, I would be leaving behind everything familiar, stepping into a role with no precedent, no guidelines, no safety net. What if I fail? What if I prove inadequate for such an important responsibility?" James chuckled softly. "Tom, you have been preparing for this role your entire adult life without knowing it. Your military service taught you about real leadership under pressure. Your years as a guard have shown you how the royal family functions, what they need, what challenges they face. Your natural inclination to mentor others has been evident since your first week on duty." The conversation with James helped Thomas begin to see the opportunity from a different perspective. Instead of focusing on his potential inadequacies, he started to consider what he could offer Prince George based on his unique combination of experiences and natural abilities. The following morning, Thomas requested a meeting with Captain Williams to discuss the situation. The captain had served long enough to understand the significance of what Prince George was offering, and his perspective as a senior member of the royal household staff would be valuable in making this decision. "Thomas, in my 30 years of service, I have seen many changes in how the royal family operates," Captain Williams said as they sat in his office. "The younger generation, particularly Prince George, seems to understand that the monarchy must evolve to remain relevant and respected. Creating a position like the one he has offered you demonstrates forward-thinking leadership that could benefit both him and the institution he will eventually lead." The captain leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I will be honest with you. Losing you from the regular guard would be a significant loss for us. You provide stability and mentorship that will be difficult to replace. However, the opportunity you are being offered represents something much larger than individual career advancement. You would be helping to shape a future king's understanding of service and leadership." Thomas appreciated the captain's balanced perspective, acknowledging both the personal and institutional implications of his decision. "Sir, do you believe I have the qualifications necessary to succeed in such a role?" Captain Williams smiled. "Thomas, qualifications for a position that has never existed before cannot be measured by traditional standards. What Prince George needs is someone with integrity, wisdom gained through experience, and the ability to provide honest guidance without being influenced by political considerations or personal ambition. You possess all of these qualities." Over the next few days, Thomas found himself observing Prince George more carefully during his regular duties. He watched how the young prince interacted with staff members, noticed his genuine interest in understanding how different aspects of the royal household functioned, and saw the thoughtful questions he asked during official briefings. These observations reinforced his belief that Prince George was sincere in his desire to learn and grow as a leader. Thomas also spent time reflecting on his own motivations and goals. At 52, he had achieved a level of security and respect in his current position that many would consider the pinnacle of success for someone with his background. Yet the opportunity to make a more significant contribution, to use his experience and insights to influence the development of a future monarch, appealed to the part of him that had always been driven by a desire to serve something larger than himself. The decision crystallized during a quiet moment while he was standing guard outside the throne room. As he watched tourists and officials pass through the corridors, each absorbed in their own purposes and concerns, Thomas realized that he had been given a rare opportunity to influence history in a positive way. The chance to help shape a future king's character and leadership style was not something that came to many people, and refusing it out of fear or comfort with the status quo would be a disservice both to Prince George and to the country they both served. That evening, Thomas called Prince George's private secretary to request another meeting. It was time to give his answer. The second meeting with Prince George took place in the same sitting room, But the atmosphere felt different this time. Thomas entered with a sense of purpose and clarity that had been absent during their first conversation. He had spent 3 days weighing every aspect of the decision, consulting with trusted friends and colleagues and examining his own motivations and fears. Now he was ready to commit to a path that would change both his life and potentially the future of the monarchy. Prince George greeted him with obvious anticipation, his youthful energy barely contained as he gestured for Thomas to take the same seat they had occupied previously. The folder containing the commission documents remained on the coffee table, but this time Thomas approached it with confidence rather than uncertainty. "Your Highness, I have given considerable thought to your generous offer," Thomas began, his voice steady and sure. "I have consulted with colleagues whose judgment I trust, reflected on my own capabilities and motivations, and considered what this opportunity could mean for both of us. I am honored to accept the position you have created, and I am committed to serving you with the same dedication I have shown throughout my career." Prince George's face lit up with genuine joy and relief. "Guard Mitchell, I cannot express how pleased I am by your decision. I was hoping you would accept. But I also understood that what I was asking represented a significant change and risk for you. Your willingness to take this step with me means more than you might realize." The prince reached for the commission document and formally presented it to Thomas. "With this appointment, you become the first person to hold the position of personal mentor and security advisor to the heir apparent. Your role will evolve as we both learn what this relationship can and should be, but it begins with my commitment to learn from your experience and your commitment to guide me honestly, regardless of whether that guidance is what I want to hear." Thomas accepted the document with a sense of ceremony that matched the moment's significance. As he held the official appointment in his hands, he felt the weight of history and the responsibility that came with helping to shape a future king's character and understanding of leadership. "Your Highness, I want you to know that I approach this role with both humility and determination," Thomas said. "I will not pretend to have all the answers, but I will share my experiences honestly and help you develop your own understanding of what effective leadership requires. My goal is not to make you think like me, but to help you think clearly about the challenges you will face." Prince George nodded appreciatively. "That is exactly what I hoped you would say. I do not want someone who will simply agree with me or tell me what they think I want to hear. I need someone who will challenge me to think more deeply, to consider perspectives I might otherwise miss, and to develop the kind of character that will serve our country well when I eventually become king." The transition process was planned to take place gradually over the following month. Thomas would continue his regular guard duties while beginning to take on additional responsibilities related to his new role. This approach would allow both him and Prince George to adjust to their changing relationship while ensuring that the security aspects of the position were properly integrated with existing protocols. Captain Williams had already begun the process of identifying Thomas's replacement among the guard staff, and James Patterson had volunteered to help train the new guard while taking on some of Thomas's current responsibilities during the transition period. The support from his colleagues made leaving his traditional role less painful and reinforced his belief that he was making the right decision. As their meeting concluded, Prince George shared his vision for how their working relationship would develop. They would begin with weekly sessions focused on discussing current events, royal duties, and the challenges of leadership in modern society. Thomas would accompany Prince George to selected official functions, providing both security expertise and perspective on how royal activities affected the people involved in supporting them. "I want you to help me understand not just what I should do as a future king, but why those actions matter and how they affect real people," Prince George explained. "You have experience with both military leadership and service within our household. You understand what it means to make sacrifices for others and how to maintain integrity under pressure. These are the qualities I need to develop." Thomas felt moved by Prince George's mature understanding of what leadership required. At 15, the future king was already thinking about his responsibilities in terms of service to others rather than personal power or privilege. This mindset gave Thomas confidence that their partnership would be productive and meaningful. The formal announcement of Thomas's appointment would be made the following week. After the necessary administrative details were completed, and the other members of the royal family had been fully briefed on the new arrangement, the unprecedented nature of the position meant that careful consideration had been given to how it would be presented to the media and the public. As Thomas prepared to leave the sitting room, Prince George stood and extended his hand in a gesture that seemed to formally mark the beginning of their new relationship. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for accepting this challenge and for agreeing to share this journey with me. I believe we can accomplish something important together." Thomas shook the prince's hand, feeling the firmness of his grip and the sincerity of his commitment. "Your Highness, I am honored by your trust and excited about the opportunity to serve in this new capacity. I will do everything in my power to justify your confidence in me." Walking back through the familiar corridors of Windsor Castle, Thomas felt as though he was seeing everything through new eyes. The paintings, the architecture, the other staff members he passed, all of it represented not just his workplace, but the institution he would now help to prepare for the future through his influence on Prince George's development as a leader. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the same courtyard where his journey had begun, but everything had changed. He wore a different uniform now, one that reflected his unique position within the royal household. The ceremonial elements remained, but subtle differences marked him as someone who served in a capacity that bridged traditional security duties with advisory responsibilities. More importantly, he carried himself with a confidence that came from knowing he was making a meaningful difference in preparing a future king for the challenges ahead. The announcement of his appointment had generated significant media interest, with journalists and royal watchers trying to understand what this new position meant for the monarchy's evolution. Some had criticized the decision as unnecessary innovation, while others praised Prince George for demonstrating forward-thinking leadership, even before assuming major royal duties. Through it all, Thomas had remained focused on his actual responsibilities rather than public perception. His weekly sessions with Prince George had evolved into something far richer than either of them had initially anticipated. What had started as formal discussions about leadership principles had grown into genuine conversations about the complexities of modern monarchy, the balance between tradition and progress, and the personal challenges of living a life dedicated to public service. Prince George had proven to be an eager student who asked thoughtful questions and challenged Thomas to articulate not just what he believed, but why those beliefs had developed through his experiences. Their conversations ranged from practical matters like managing public appearances and understanding security protocols, to deeper philosophical questions about duty, sacrifice, and the purpose of monarchy in contemporary society. Thomas had accompanied Prince George to numerous official functions, providing security oversight, while also observing how the young prince applied the concepts they discussed in their private sessions. He watched with pride as Prince George demonstrated genuine interest in the people he met, asked substantive questions about their work and lives, and showed the kind of natural empathy that couldn't be taught but could be encouraged and developed. On this particular morning, Thomas was preparing for what would be their most significant public appearance together. Prince George was scheduled to speak at a veterans' charity event, an occasion that would allow him to demonstrate his understanding of military service and sacrifice. Thomas had helped him prepare for the speech, sharing insights about the veteran experience that could only come from someone who had lived it. The event took place at a London hotel, with an audience of veterans from various conflicts, their families and supporters of military charities. Thomas watched from his position near the stage as Prince George addressed the gathering, with a maturity and authenticity that impressed everyone present. The speech included references to sacrifice, service, and the ongoing responsibility society had to support those who had served their country. During the reception following the formal program, Thomas observed Prince George as he moved through the crowd, speaking individually with veterans and their families. The conversations were genuine and substantial, reflecting the young prince's growing understanding of what military service meant to those who had experienced it. Several veterans approached Thomas afterward to express their appreciation for Prince George's obvious sincerity and knowledge. "Your influence on him is clear," said Colonel Sarah Davies, a retired officer who had served 3 tours in Iraq. "He spoke to my husband about his experiences in a way that showed real understanding of what military families go through. That kind of insight doesn't come from briefing papers or formal education. Someone who has lived it taught him those things." Thomas felt a deep satisfaction hearing this feedback. The success of Prince George's interactions with the veterans validated the approach they had taken to his education about leadership and service. Rather than simply learning facts and protocols, Prince George was developing genuine empathy and understanding that would serve him well throughout his future. The drive back to Windsor Castle provided an opportunity for Thomas and Prince George to discuss the day's events. The prince was energized by the positive responses he had received and eager to understand how he could build on the connections he had made with the veteran community. "Thomas, I felt something different today than I have at other official functions," Prince George said as their car moved through the London traffic. The conversations felt real rather than ceremonial. People were sharing things with me that mattered to them, and I felt like I actually understood what they were talking about because of our discussions over the past months. Thomas smiled, recognizing this as a breakthrough moment in Prince George's development. "Your Highness, what you experienced today is the difference between going through the motions of royal duties and actually connecting with the people you serve." The veterans could sense that your interest in their experiences was genuine, that you had taken the time to understand what their service meant. As they arrived back at the castle, Thomas reflected on how much had changed since that first unexpected meeting 6 months earlier. Prince George had grown not just in knowledge but in wisdom, developing the kind of character and understanding that would serve him well as a future king. Their partnership had exceeded both of their expectations, creating a foundation for leadership development that would continue to evolve as Prince George matured. That evening, as Thomas sat in his new office reviewing notes from their latest session, he received a handwritten letter from Prince George. The message was brief but deeply meaningful. "Thomas, today I understood for the first time what it truly means to serve others, rather than simply fulfill obligations. Thank you for helping me discover the difference. Your friend, George." Thomas folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, next to the original commission document that had started this journey. He thought about his late wife, Margaret, and how proud she would have been to see him in this role, using his experiences to help shape a future king's character. He thought about his fellow guards, particularly James Patterson, who had supported his decision to step into this unknown territory. Most importantly, he thought about Prince George and the man he was becoming. The quiet yet powerful decision that had brought them together had created something neither of them had fully anticipated. A partnership that was preparing not just a prince for kingship, but a young man for a lifetime of meaningful service to others. As Thomas turned off the lights in his office and prepared to head home, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His step down from the traditional guard role had led to something far more significant than he could have imagined. Sometimes the most important decisions were the ones that required leaving behind what was comfortable and familiar, to embrace the possibility of making a real difference in the world.